Alright people, so today we're going to do a little recap of clay basics. So when you get your clay, it's going to be in a slab form. A slab is just a flat, basically brick of clay. I'm going to show you some different ways to manipulate it. Cut it apart so that you have the amount you want, and if you want to have a base, you need to roll it out. So whenever you're rolling clay, you need to remember to start from the middle of your clay, apply a little bit of pressure and roll out, and then roll back. And if you want to change how thick it is, always make sure you rotate it. Then middle, always start from the middle and then roll. You never want a slab to get thinner than the thickness of your pointer finger, otherwise it will break. Also with a slab, you need to continually make sure that you are picking it up so that it doesn't create a suction cup to your table. If you have rough edges like this, and this is the shape that you want your clay piece to be, add just a tiny bit of water to it, and take your finger and smooth them out. A slab is a really easy shape to cut things out of. So if I want like a heart, I can do that. And I can just remove this, and look, I have a heart shape. From there, whenever you cut out anything from a slab, always make sure that you run your finger along the edge and smooth it out. Otherwise, it'll have really sharp edges and be likely to break later on. Especially, it might not break while the clay is still wet, but when it's dry, it becomes very sharp and fragile. So I'm just gonna take away some of those sharp edges. Alright, so that's a basic slab shape. The next basic shape I want to review with you guys is a coil. So a coil is just a long, skinny snake of clay. So I took just a slab of clay and I was kind of pinching it to get it off some of those rough edges. And now I'm going to start from the middle. Again, similar way of how I rolled the clay out with a rolling pin. And I'm going to roll out. And go back to the middle and roll out. And I keep doing that, rolling from the middle out to slowly make my clay longer. So the thinner it becomes, the longer it will become as well. And notice that I'm using the palm of my hand, because when I use my fingers, I can make little ridges and actually put finger marks in it. And when I'm using my hand doesn't have those same ridges that my fingers have. So it becomes less likely that I will leave those finger ridges. Also with a coil, if you're using it to build on top, you need to make sure that's the thickness of your pointer finger. For me, it's the thickness of my pinky because I have bigger fingers than you do. So that was a coil and a slab. And the last one is a pinch pot. So a pinch pot is just a sphere. So I'm going to take a piece of clay, I'm going to roll it between my hands. A lot of times I like to say hi to my clay. So like, hello, how are you doing? So I'm just pinching it in between the palms of my hand as I'm rolling it. And I'm starting to manipulate that square that it originally was into a sphere. And I can roll it on my table, and I can roll it in my hands. But the objective is to get a nice, smooth sphere. If I have any big cracks on it, I can take my thumb and smooth those cracks out before I go any further. Because it's always easier to smooth out cracks now than to do it later. So for a pinch pot, you stick your thumb in. You don't go all the way through, and you take your fingers and you pinch around it. Alright? So again, if I had any cracks like I do right here, I would make sure that I smooth them out before I go any further. Alright, so if I wanted to attach this coil to this heart, I would actually push down just a little bit on it, and when I lift it up, I can see a ring of where it was. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a needle tool, and yes, it's pokey, and I'm going to scratch up the surface, and I'm going to do some cross hatching. So I'm doing some hatching right now, where I'm scratching up the surface, and then I'm going to cross hatch. So that means I'm making 90-degree angle lines going the opposite direction. And then I'm actually going to do exactly the same thing in where this circle is. Make my lines, and now I'm going to make my other lines. And I can see exactly where I need to go. The reason I hatch and cross hatch is because it creates brings up pieces of clay that wouldn't have been released before, and when it mixes with the water, it creates something called slip, and it also makes a suction cup. So I'm going to press this down so it fits on here, and then I'm going to weld, and every single thing that you attach to another piece of clay has to be scored, wet, and welded together. So I'm going to move this so you can actually see what I'm doing. I'm going to refocus it. So welding is when you are pushing clay from one side. Push that down just a little bit. Okay, so I'm pushing clay from one part down to the other. So I'm going to take this tool, I'm going to press it down. So I'm welding those pieces of clay together. Because though it might stick now because I have that wet clay that created slip and created a suction cup in my clay, once it's dry, that suction cup will dry out and it'll no longer exist. So I have to make sure I weld the two pieces together so they become one. Go all the way across, and I can actually take my finger and smooth out. Now, inside of this clay, right now, I have air trapped inside. So when air gets hot, it does what? It expands. So when it expands, it gets hotter and hotter, and if it can't go anywhere because you've welded it all together, it's going to explode. And when something explodes in the kiln, it doesn't just affect your piece, it affects everyone's around it, because it creates shrapnel and it makes it go all over. So what we're actually going to do is you're just going to flip it over, and I'm going to poke a hole in the back and make it just a little hole, so now air can actually escape. So, basic things. If I wanted to attach a coil around this, I'd figure out how much coil I needed. I'd scratch up. I'd cross hatch and hatch the whole surface. I'd wet it. And then I'd place it. And whenever you're attaching clay to itself, you never want to just lay it on, and you never want to pinch it. You always want to make sure that you're welding it. And you can weld with your finger. You can also use tools because you're involved, and you use tools to help you.